Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered, whose life have I been living all these years? You've spent decades showing up for others, raising children, holding families together, being the reliable one at work, in your community, in your home. And maybe you did it gladly, even proudly. But somewhere along the way, did you ever stop and ask, what about me? It's a question that catches up with us, especially as we get older. Not because we regret our past, but because we begin to feel something deeper, an ache for authenticity, a longing to reconnect with the part of ourselves that got buried beneath duty, noise, and expectations. Maybe the children are grown. Maybe retirement has settled in. Maybe the silence in the house is louder than it used to be. And in that quiet, a different kind of voice begins to speak. One of the most profound insights in modern psychology is that the most important journey we take is the one within. Not the one across cities or continents, but the one back to our own soul. And for many of us, especially after 60, this is the chapter where that journey truly begins. You see, choosing yourself doesn't mean turning your back on people or abandoning responsibility. It simply means giving yourself the same care, attention, and respect that you've given to everyone else for so long. And that can be a radical act, especially for those of us raised to believe that selflessness is the highest virtue. But what if I told you that there's strength in finally saying, "It's my turn"? Let's be honest. Many of us have lived by other people's definitions of success, love, worthiness. We smiled when we were tired. We agreed when we disagreed. We stayed when our heart whispered, "Go." We gave until we felt invisible. And it wasn't weakness. It was love, survival, sacrifice. But now is the time to ask, who am I when no one is watching? That question is not just powerful, it's liberating. When you start to choose yourself, the world around you doesn't always know what to do. People might say, you've changed, or you're being selfish. But you know what? Choosing yourself isn't about changing who you are. It's about remembering who you've always been, underneath the roles, the masks, the expectations. I remember speaking with a woman in her late 60s who had recently lost her husband. She told me, "For the first time in my life, I'm learning who I am without being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's helper." It's terrifying, and yet, strangely beautiful. That's the heart of this journey. The rediscovery. The quiet unfolding of the self. And it's not always easy. Sometimes it begins with a feeling you can't shake, an emptiness you can't explain. You wake up one day and realize you've spent your whole life saying yes when you wanted to say no. You've buried your passions to meet other people's needs. You've silenced your own voice for the sake of harmony. And then something breaks. Not in a painful way, but like a shell cracking open. Inside that crack is the real you asking a simple question. What if, just this once, I chose me? That's where the transformation begins. And it's not about making drastic moves or running away from everything. Sometimes choosing yourself is quiet. It looks like going for a walk alone and not answering the phone. It sounds like finally saying, "I don't agree with that," or "I need time for me." It feels like honoring your truth, even when it makes others uncomfortable. When you begin to set boundaries, when you start listening to that inner whisper, some people might pull away. That's okay. The people who stay, the ones who see you, really see you, those are the people worth walking beside in this new chapter. And if this feels unfamiliar, even a little scary, you're not alone. We were taught to be good, to keep the peace, to give. But true fulfillment doesn't come from being who others want us to be. It comes from discovering and becoming who we truly are. Not the version of you that checked every box, that did all the right things, but the version that sings in silence, that feels most alive when you're not trying so hard to be perfect. The beauty of this age, of this stage in life, is that you have nothing left to prove. You don't have to meet anyone's expectations. You get to define what your days look like, what brings you peace, what lights you up from the inside. And there's no age limit on that kind of freedom. So if you're feeling a shift, if something inside you is stirring, don't push it away. That's not restlessness. That's your soul knocking, saying, I'm still here. I've been waiting. And maybe, for the first time in a long while, you're ready to answer. Sometimes when we finally begin to choose ourselves, life responds in ways we never expected. It's as if the world shifts ever so slightly. Old patterns begin to fall away, and new people or opportunities gently start to appear. You might think it's coincidence, but some call it something else: synchronicity. That beautiful, almost magical alignment that happens when your inner truth starts to match your outer world. Have you ever made a decision that felt completely right in your gut, even if it didn't make sense to anyone else? And then suddenly, something or someone shows up to support that choice? That's not luck. That's what happens when you start living in alignment with who you truly are. One woman I spoke to had always loved painting, but for decades, she told herself it wasn't practical. I'm a mother, she said. I'm a wife. I don't have time for dreams. But after her children moved out and her calendar grew quieter, something inside her called out again. So she dusted off her old brushes and began painting late at night, just for herself. 2 months later, a friend invited her to display her art in a local library. That led to a small gallery show. And now, at 72, she's painting more than ever. Not for money, not for applause, but because it fills her with life. That's what it means to choose yourself. But don't be fooled. This path isn't without its challenges. Choosing yourself can stir things up, especially within. You might notice old fears creeping in. Thoughts like, is it too late? Will anyone understand? Or, what if I fail? It's normal. Growth is never completely comfortable. It often comes with growing pains. And sometimes the most difficult part isn't what others say. It's what we tell ourselves. That little voice that whispers, who do you think you are, starting over at your age? But let me ask you something. If not now, when? If not you, then who? We've spent so much of our lives serving others, carrying weight we didn't always want to carry. Now, you get to set it down. You get to ask, what do I want to feel today? And mean it. And no, that's not selfish. That's self-respect. It's giving your soul the attention it's been quietly longing for. Sometimes the first step is as simple as sitting in silence without reaching for your phone or TV remote, letting the stillness speak. You might feel discomfort at first. That's okay. Stillness has a way of bringing up things we've buried. Memories, regrets, forgotten dreams. But it also brings clarity. You might find pieces of yourself you thought were lost, old joys, new desires, or a deeper sense of peace. And here's something else to remember. You don't need anyone's permission to evolve. You don't need to explain your choices or justify your happiness. If something no longer feels right, be it a routine, a relationship, even a belief, you are allowed to let it go. That's not failure. That's maturity. Wisdom. You've earned the right to live on your own terms. One gentleman I met, a retired teacher in his early 70s, shared that he used to feel guilty saying no to invitations. He worried people would think he was rude or distant. But after years of saying yes out of obligation, he began saying yes only to what felt good. It's funny, he said. Now that I'm finally honest about what I want, I feel lighter, freer. And the people who matter most, they understand. That's the beautiful side effect of choosing yourself. Your real tribe, your true connections, start to appear. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're being truer. And sometimes, the journey brings solitude. That's the part many people fear, the quiet evenings, the weekends without plans, the holidays that feel a little emptier. But what if I told you that solitude isn't a punishment? It's an invitation. An invitation to heal, to reflect, to rekindle your relationship with the most important person in your life, you. In those quiet hours, you get to ask questions you may not have had space for before. What brings me joy now? What kind of mornings do I want? What makes me feel alive, even if no one else understands it? These aren't just questions, they're keys. Keys that unlock a deeper kind of fulfillment, one that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. It's okay to slow down, to enjoy your tea a little longer, to take walks without checking the time, to read that book you've been meaning to read for years, or to sit in the sun and simply breathe. Choosing yourself doesn't require big, bold declarations. Often, it's in the smallest decisions that we find the greatest power. Maybe it starts with finally signing up for that watercolor class, or going back to church, or writing letters to your younger self, or letting go of a grudge that's been weighing on your heart. These are quiet revolutions. They don't make headlines, but they change lives, starting with yours. You see, life after 60 isn't the end of the story. It's a new chapter, and you get to write it with more truth, more depth, and more intention than ever before. Because now, you know what matters. You've lived, you've loved, you've lost, and all of it has shaped you into someone wiser, more tender, more resilient. And no, you may not have all the answers yet, but you don't need them. You just need the courage to listen to yourself, to trust that your inner compass still works, that even now, it's pointing you somewhere beautiful. There's something deeply powerful that begins to happen when you stop running from yourself. When you stop apologizing for needing time, space, or rest. When you stop measuring your worth by how productive you are or how much others praise you. You begin to see yourself, not as a role, not as a checklist of achievements, but as a whole, living, breathing person. Not perfect, but complete. There's a saying, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. And waking up, in this sense, means finally seeing your life through your own eyes. Not through the lens of others' expectations, not through guilt or obligation, but through clarity and care. That's not an easy thing to do. It takes courage to stop living on autopilot, to question what you've accepted for years simply because it felt safe or familiar. But here's the truth. Safety and freedom are not always the same thing. And sometimes, what we've called comfort is just a well-decorated cage. Choosing yourself means walking out of that cage, even if your legs are shaky. It means stepping into a life that's not just lived, but felt. You may not be able to change the past, but you are absolutely in control of what comes next. And what comes next can be softer, wiser, richer. One man I met shared a story about how, for most of his adult life, he played the role of provider and protector. His identity was tied to his job, his usefulness, his strength. But after retirement, when the structure fell away, he realized he didn't know how to just be. I was always doing something for someone else, he said. I didn't know what to do with myself when no one needed anything. But he didn't run from that discomfort. He stayed with it. He started gardening, something he hadn't done since childhood. At first, it felt silly. But soon, that little patch of earth became his sanctuary. A place where he could be still, connected, and free. I thought I needed a role to matter, he said. But I found peace in simply being me. That's what this journey is about. Not grand gestures, not chasing after youth or trying to keep up with the pace of the world. It's about returning to yourself with gentleness, reclaiming parts of you that got lost along the way. Maybe that's your creativity. Maybe it's your voice. Maybe it's your laughter. Sometimes we lose those things not because life was cruel, but because we were too busy surviving to notice they were slipping away. But they're still there, waiting for you to slow down long enough to remember. And when you do, when you say yes to what nourishes you and no to what drains you, you begin to build a life that feels less like a performance and more like a home. That might mean downsizing your commitments, or finally saying goodbye to people who constantly take without giving. or spending more time in nature, in prayer, or with yourself. It might mean taking naps without guilt, listening to music that stirs your soul, or simply breathing deeper than you have in years. This journey, this process of choosing yourself, it doesn't have to be loud. In fact, it often happens in whispers. In the quiet, knowing that you are worthy, not because of what you do for others, but because of who you are, just as you are. You are allowed to outgrow who you used to be. You are allowed to no longer fit into old expectations. And you are certainly allowed to redefine what joy, peace, and purpose look like for you. And yes, some days will still feel hard. You might feel lonely. You might doubt your path. You might miss the old roles, the old rhythm. That's okay. This isn't about pretending everything is perfect. It's about being honest. It's about knowing that even in the hard days, you're no longer abandoning yourself. And with time, you'll find that the quiet becomes less empty and more sacred. That the stillness begins to fill you instead of frighten you. That the approval of others, while once important, no longer decides how you feel about yourself when you wake up in the morning. There's a concept in psychology called individuation, the process of becoming fully, uniquely yourself. Not who your family wanted. Not who society admired, but you. The version of yourself that feels most real when the world goes quiet. The one who doesn't need applause, just inner peace. And maybe you're already feeling glimpses of that now. Maybe something in your chest relaxes when you hear these words. That's not coincidence. That's your spirit recognizing truth. That's the beginning of your own becoming. So take your time. Be patient with yourself. Let the old layers fall away one by one. You don't need to rush. There is no deadline to wholeness. Every step you take back to yourself is a step toward freedom. And along the way, you might inspire someone else to do the same. A friend, a grandchild, a neighbor. Not because you gave them advice, but because you showed them, through your living example, that it's never too late to come home to yourself. You're not behind. You're right on time. When you finally begin to live from the inside out, something deep within settles. You stop chasing, proving, explaining. And instead, you start becoming more present, more aware, more at peace with exactly where you are. The noise of the world fades a little. The pressure lifts. And for the first time in a long while, you can simply breathe. You begin to understand that peace doesn't always look like stillness. Sometimes, it looks like letting go. Letting go of guilt for choosing rest over responsibilities that no longer serve you. Letting go of the idea that you have to be constantly needed to be valuable. Letting go of the belief that your worth depends on how useful you are to everyone else. Because here's the truth, you've already done so much. You've loved, you've given, you've shown up, over and over again. And now it's time to love yourself with that same devotion. Not as a reward, not as a backup plan, but because it's what your soul has needed all along. There's something remarkable about this stage of life. With age comes perspective. And with perspective comes the ability to see what truly matters. The noise of your 20s, the striving of your 30s, the sacrifices of your 40s and 50s, they've all led you here. Not to an ending, but to an opening. A chance to rewrite your story, not for anyone else, but for you. You are not running out of time. You are stepping into your time. I once met a woman in her 70s who had recently taken up piano. She'd wanted to learn since childhood, but life had other plans. She said, "When I sit at that piano, I don't feel old. I feel alive. I feel like that little girl who used to dream." That is the magic of choosing yourself. It reconnects you with the parts you thought were gone, but were only sleeping. Maybe for you, it's not music. Maybe it's writing or gardening, or simply taking long walks without explaining where you're going or why. Maybe it's learning something new, traveling somewhere you've always wanted to go, or just giving yourself permission to do nothing without guilt. Whatever it is, honor it. Because when you choose yourself, even in small ways, your entire life begins to feel more aligned. And along this path, you might start to notice something. You're not so afraid anymore. Not of being alone. Not of being misunderstood. Not even of getting older. Because you've realized that aging isn't a loss, it's a return. A return to simplicity. A return to inner wisdom. A return to the freedom of not needing to be anyone but yourself. This is the gift of later life. It gives you space. Space to reflect. Space to rest. Space to become. You don't need to fill every moment with noise. Sometimes the most sacred moments come in the quiet. When the sun warms your face. When a memory brings a smile instead of sorrow. When you feel grateful just to be here, in this breath, in this body, still becoming. And yes, there will be moments of doubt. Moments when the world feels too fast, too noisy, too distant. But in those moments, you can return to your truth. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not late. You are exactly where you are meant to be. The journey inward is the most important of all. Because when you look within, you stop being a stranger to your own life. You reconnect with the voice you once quieted, the needs you once ignored, the dreams you once delayed. You begin to trust yourself again. You begin to listen. And in that listening, you find your freedom. So if no one's told you this lately, let me be the one. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to heal. You are allowed to grow. And most of all, you are allowed to be happy even now, especially now. Your story is not over. Not by a long shot. In fact, some of the most beautiful pages have yet to be written. And this time, they'll be written with your voice, your truth, your heart. No more scripts written by others. No more roles that don't fit. Just you, raw, real, radiant. If these words speak to something deep inside you, I invite you to take a moment, right now, to honor that feeling, to close your eyes, to place a hand on your heart, and to whisper to yourself, I choose me. Not because you're perfect, but because you're worthy. Not because you need fixing, but because you deserve freedom. Not because the world told you to, but because your soul is ready. And if you've made it this far in the video, I want to thank you. Not just for watching, but for showing up for yourself. That alone is an act of courage. If this message resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me what choosing yourself means to you. You never know who your story might inspire. And if this video touched your heart, consider liking it, sharing it, and subscribing to the channel. We're building a gentle, supportive space here, a place where wisdom, reflection, and real connection are always welcome. Here's to living your truest life at any age. And to never forgetting, it's never too late to come home to yourself. See you in the next video.